Pepper, come back!
Pepper landed softly on the old man's blanket before anyone reached the doorway. The wheelchair-bound billionaire stared at the orange cat in disbelief as it circled twice, settled comfortably across his legs, and began purring as though it had finally found the person it had been looking for. "No?" A terrified little voice cried from the hallway. "Pepper, come back!" Tiny footsteps thundered closer. A little girl burst into the room, stopped dead at the doorway, and her face drained of every bit of color. I'm sorry," she whispered, breathing hard. "He wasn't supposed to come in here." She took one cautious step toward the bed. Pepper didn't move. Instead, he pressed himself even closer against the old man's chest. The room fell silent. The billionaire slowly lowered a trembling hand toward the cat, hesitating as though he had forgotten what it felt like to touch something alive. When his fingers finally brushed the soft orange fur, Pepper closed his eyes and purred even louder. A dry laugh escaped the old man's lips, rusted, almost painful to hear. It sounded like a man using his voice after years of silence. The little girl's eyes widened. "You laughed." The old man looked almost surprised himself. "I did." Before either of them could say another word, hurried footsteps echoed through the hallway. Zuri, a young black woman, rushed into the room, breathing hard, only to freeze the instant she recognized where she was. Her face turned white. She immediately lowered her head. "Chairman Baek, I'm so sorry. Please forgive us. She didn't mean to come here. I'll take her right now." She reached for Pepper. The cat refused. She tried again. Pepper held onto the blanket with all four paws. The old man's lips curled into the smallest smile. "I don't think," he said quietly, "he wants to leave." Amara looked up, confused. She had worked inside this mansion for nearly 8 months. No one smiled here, especially not Chairman Baek Man-soo. Everyone knew the old billionaire spent his days alone in this room. Everyone knew the staff had been forbidden from speaking to him unless Madame Yoon gave permission. Everyone knew crossing that line meant losing your job. And yet, here he was, smiling at a stray orange cat. "I'm really sorry, sir," Amara said again, her voice trembling. "Please don't punish her. If anyone has to leave this house, let it be me." The old man looked at her for a long moment. Then, "When was the last time," he asked quietly, "someone brought a child into this room?" Amara blinked. I don't know, sir." He nodded, almost to himself. "I don't either." Silence settled over the room. Not awkward, lonely. The kind of silence that had lived there for years. Then Zuri took one tiny step closer. "My mommy says, Pepper only stays with good people." Amara's heart nearly stopped. "Zuri?" But the old man didn't seem offended. He looked down at the cat sleeping peacefully against him. "Does she?" Zuri nodded. "He always knows." The old man's eyes slowly filled with something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Hope. A knock shattered the moment. 3 sharp knocks. Every smile disappeared from Amara's face. Her body went rigid. She knew that knock. Madame Yoon. Without another word, she scooped Zuri into one arm and reached for Pepper with the other. The cat refused to move. Outside, the doorknob began to turn. There was nowhere to go, and 1 second to decide. Amara's eyes landed on the reading chair by the window, deep, high-backed, the one piece of furniture in the room large enough to disappear behind. And she moved before she'd finished thinking it through, Zuri's weight jolting against her hip, one hand already rising to cover her daughter's mouth. Not a sound. She breathed, barely audible. They dropped behind the chair together, just as the door swung open. Pepper, magnificently unhelpful, stayed exactly where he was. Madame Yoon stepped into the room, in a silk robe that cost more than Amara's yearly salary, a phone pressed to her ear, mid-sentence, to someone about a spa reservation. For one endless moment, she didn't even look toward the bed. Amara counted her own heartbeat in the silence. 1, 2, 3. Certain each one was audible from across the room. Then Mira's eyes found the cat and narrowed. "What is that?" "A visitor," Man-soo said. Amara, watching through the narrow gap between the chair's wing and the wall, saw something in his voice fold itself carefully flat, the warmth of a minute ago tucked away somewhere Mira couldn't reach. It wandered in. Where did it come from? "I don't know." Mira crossed the room slowly, heels sharp against the marble, and studied the cat the way she studied everything in this house, for what it cost, what it was worth, whether it belonged to her. Disgusting. "I'll have someone remove it. Leave it." Something in his tone made her pause. "Excuse me?" "I said leave it." His hand settled, light as a held breath, on Pepper's back. "It's the first thing in this room that's chosen to be here in longer than I can remember." For one dangerous second, Mira's eyes swept the rest of the room. Amara didn't breathe. Then Mira's mouth curved into a smile that reached nowhere near her eyes. "As you wish." She turned, phone already rising back to her ear, and paused only once more at the door, scanning the room a final time. She never looked behind the chair. The door clicked shut. Amara counted to 20 before letting her hand fall from Zuri's mouth, and even then didn't move for another 10, listening to the heels fade down the corridor. Zuri exhaled like she'd been holding her breath the entire time, which she had. That was scary. "I know, baby." "Is that lady mean?" Amara opened her mouth, found no answer that was both honest and safe to say out loud in this house, and closed it again. Word of the incident reached the kitchen before Amara did. She felt it walking in, the particular hush of a room that had been mid-conversation a second earlier, 2 junior maids suddenly absorbed in a sink that didn't need scrubbing. "You went into his room." Mrs. Song stood with her arms crossed, though something underneath the scolding looked closer to worry than anger. "My daughter's cat got loose. I went to get them both." Mrs. Song's eyes flicked toward the doorway, an old habit. "You're lucky Madame Yoon didn't find you standing there. She's ended careers for less." Amara pulled out a chair, suddenly aware of how hard her hands were still shaking. "It's been quiet in that wing lately, hasn't it? Even before today." Mrs. Song considered her, then lowered her voice. "Quieter, since the young master went overseas." "Jun-ho." She said the name carefully, the way people handle something they're not sure is safe to pick up. Something about it made Amara's stomach drop, faint, gone almost before she noticed it, the way a name can snag on nothing at all. "He wasn't always like this," Mrs. Song went on. "Serious, careful, married to that company the way some men marry a woman. But something happened, right around the time his mother passed. Nobody in this house says what, exactly, just that the boy who came back from it wasn't the one who left." Across the kitchen, a senior maid named Susie looked up from the tea tray she was arranging and smiled. Warm, easy, the kind of smile that made new staff feel, within a week, like they'd found someone safely on their side. "Don't let Mrs. Song scare you," Susie said, setting the last cup in place. "Madame Yoon isn't half as sharp as this house likes to pretend. There are ways around her, if you know what you're doing." She winked. "I could show you a few, if you're planning on going back up there, and something tells me you are." Amara laughed despite herself, surprised by it. "Is it that obvious?" "Sweetheart," Susie said, already turning back to her tray. "It was obvious the moment you walked in here still shaking. That night, Amara knelt beside a loose floorboard beneath her bed, and, for once, didn't stop herself from lifting it. Inside the small locked box, a hotel keycard, ink faded past reading, from a city she still dreamed about sometimes without meaning to. A worn leather wallet with no identification inside, nothing that had ever let her put a name to the man it belonged to. A ring, plain, expensive, the kind a man forgets he's wearing until it's gone. She turned it once between her fingers, the way she did most nights she let herself open the box at all, and set it back exactly where it belonged, before sliding the floorboard into place. Some doors, she'd learned, were easier to close than to lock. It started small. A slightly better portion of rice slipped onto Man-soo's tray, a blanket refolded the exact way he preferred it. Inside the windows, when Mira was gone, Amara went to him, and slowly, in inches too small for anyone but her to notice at first, something in him began to shift. He asked for his hair combed properly. He finished a full bowl of soup without being coaxed. He started asking what day of the week it was, not from confusion, but because he had started caring what tomorrow might bring. It happened on an ordinary Wednesday. Zuri had fallen half asleep against his side, pepper draped across both their laps, the late afternoon light turning the room gold. Zuri yawned, burrowed deeper into his shoulder, and murmured, without any weight behind it at all, "Good night, Grandpa." The room went utterly still. Man-soo's hand froze mid-stroke over Pepper's fur. "Zuri," Amara started, already bracing to apologize. "It's all right." His voice cracked clean down the middle. He looked at the sleeping child against his side, and something enormous moved across his face. Eyes bright, jaw working, a man fighting to hold himself together in front of a 5-year-old with no idea what she'd just done to him. "Please," he said, when he trusted his voice again, "don't correct her." That night, dusting a drawer she hadn't been asked to clean, Amara found it stuck, swollen, forced shut around something too full for it. Inside, 100 folded crayon drawings, suns with too many rays. A lopsided orange cat, a stick figure family under a rainbow, labeled US, one letter written backward, some dated on the back, in a hand that shook worse than his voice ever did. She closed the drawer exactly as she'd found it. 4 o'clock became a fixture no one had to schedule. Pepper learned it first, sitting by the servant's door, a full 10 minutes early, ears pricked, tail curled neatly around his paws, watching the corridor with the fierce patience of an animal that had decided, entirely on his own terms, that this mattered. Mrs. Song found her in the linen room a few evenings later and shut the door, which she never did, not once, in all the months Amara had known her. You should know something before you get in any deeper. About the chairman? About his first wife. Mrs. Song's hands twisted together, an old nervous habit. So Yo-yeon, Junho's mother, died 4 years ago. Heart failure, the papers said. Said? I was here that night, told to stay out of that wing entirely. By morning, Madame Yoon was already composed, calm, in a way that felt rehearsed rather than felt. She shook her head slowly. I have no proof of anything, Amara. I'm not accusing anyone of what I could stand behind in front of a judge. But I think a woman doesn't marry a sick old man for love. I think the first wife died very conveniently, right around the time Madame Yoon started circling this house, like she'd already measured it for new curtains. And I think you should be careful how close you let that little girl of yours get to a man someone here might already be trying to finish off. Finish off. The words sat in the small room long after Mrs. Song had gone. She saw it happen with her own eyes the following week, and she would spend a long time afterward wishing she hadn't. She was with Man-soo in the late afternoon, Zuri fully asleep against his side, Pepper stretched heavy across both their laps, when she heard the unmistakable click of heels in the hallway, a full hour earlier than Madame Yoon's usual Thursday return. No time to reach the door. Amara gathered Zuri up half asleep and headed the opposite direction. Pepper, characteristically unbothered by any of this, sauntered directly into the doorway just as Mira reached it, and when she aimed an irritated kick at him without breaking stride on her call, he simply darted sideways between her ankles at the last possible second, nearly upending her entirely, sending her stumbling half a step into the room with a muttered curse, and in the 3 seconds that bought, Amara was already behind the heavy curtain. Through the gap in the curtain, she watched Mira catch herself against the doorframe, phone still pressed to her ear, robe sliding half off one shoulder, undignified for exactly 1 second before the composure slid back into place, like nothing had happened at all. Then she straightened, glanced once at the sleeping chairman, and moved toward the small cabinet where his medication was kept. She watched her open it, watched her lift out the bottle Dr. Kang had personally labeled that week, watched her draw an identical bottle from her own robe pocket and set it in the first one's place, the label matching so precisely that no nurse checking in on a Friday would think to look twice. It took less than a minute. She didn't rush. That was the detail that stayed lodged in Amara's chest longest. How unhurried it was. How many times this exact hand must have done this exact thing before it stopped needing to think about it at all. Mira straightened her robe, glanced once more at her sleeping husband with something almost like satisfaction, and left as quietly as she'd come. Amara didn't move again until the corridor had been silent for a full minute. Zuri's small weight still slack against her shoulder, her own pulse roaring in her ears. She told no one that week. What did she actually have? A maid's word against a chairman's own wife? Instead, carefully, she mentioned to the nurse who assisted Dr. Kang that the chairman had seemed unsteady lately, after his morning dose specifically. It reached him within days. If you've made it this far into the story, let me know in the comments that you're still watching. His numbers should be improving, Dr. Kang told Mira, spreading 2 months of charts across the sitting room table between them, frustration audible under the professional calm. Slowly, but improving. Instead, they're flat. Worse, some weeks, I genuinely don't understand it. Perhaps his body is simply failing, doctor. He isn't a young man. Perhaps. He didn't sound convinced, and adjusted the dosage down, cautious, unwilling to risk a reaction he couldn't explain. For 2 weeks, Man-soo grew marginally steadier. Amara let herself believe it might hold. It didn't. The numbers slid backward again the following Friday, and this time Dr. Kang didn't dress the suspicion up in professional caution. "This makes no medical sense," he said, half to himself, flipping through his own notes, as if the answer might be hiding between lines he'd already read a dozen times. "The medicine should be working. Doctors don't always have every answer, Yushin," Mira said gently. "No," he agreed slowly. "But charts like this usually mean one of 2 things. Either someone isn't taking what they're prescribed, or someone isn't receiving it." He looked up, real suspicion flickering behind his eyes before caution smoothed it away. "I'm ordering a full panel, and I want a nurse logging every dose personally, not just a schedule taped to the door." Something tightened, briefly, behind Mira's composed face. "Whatever you think is best, doctor." Junho came home 2 days later, unannounced, and the house felt his absence before it felt his arrival. A junior maid rehearsing his correct title under her breath, Mrs. Song setting out the good tea without being asked twice. He found his father by the window, thinner than a few months should reasonably have made him. The first thing Man-soo said, before the flight, before company updates, was about an angel. "She comes when your stepmother isn't watching," Man-soo said, eyes brighter than Junho remembered them being in years. "Sometimes it's the maid herself. Sometimes it's her little girl, and a cat that's decided this room belongs to him now. I don't even know her name. I've never asked. I was afraid asking would somehow make her stop coming." "An angel," Junho repeated, half a smile tugging at his mouth. "Laugh if you'd like. I hadn't laughed once in years before she wandered into this room by accident." Junho didn't laugh. He found, to his own mild surprise, that he believed every word of it. He found her 2 days later, kneeling in the hallway outside the kitchen, helping Zuri retie a stubborn shoelace, while Pepper wound impatiently around both their ankles. "You're the one my father calls an angel," Junho said. Amara went still, the lace forgotten between her fingers, something in his voice tightening her chest for half a second before she pushed the feeling away, the way she'd trained herself, over 6 years, to push away anything that reminded her, however faintly, of things better left buried. "I'm the maid who brings her daughter to visit him, sir. Nothing nearly that dramatic." He disagrees. Junho studied her a moment too long. Something about the set of her jaw catching at a thread in the back of his mind. He couldn't follow. He told himself it was jet lag. "I'm Junho. I know who you are, sir." "Junho," he corrected. "Not sir. Not from the only person who's given him real company in months." From the kitchen doorway, Mrs. Song watched something pass between them that made her set down her tray entirely, before deciding, wisely, that whatever it wasn't hers to interrupt. Once word settled through the household that the young master approved of the maid's visits, the corridors changed. Staff stopped lowering their voices when Amara passed. For the first time in months, she walked to see Man-soo without counting Mira's schedule in her head like a countdown. Mira noticed immediately. She did not confront it. She simply stopped attacking anywhere the household might see, and began, instead, to plan somewhere it couldn't. The kitchen quietly reduced Man-soo's portions, blamed on a dietary recommendation no doctor had actually made. It was a small thing. It was meant to be the first of several. He found her the following week in the library on a rainy afternoon, a worn architecture textbook, open across her lap, sketching a rough building elevation into the margin of an old newspaper, because there had been nothing else nearby to draw on. "You studied this?" She closed the book a beat too quickly. "A long time ago. What happened?" "Life happened." She stood, smoothing her apron flat. "It's not a very interesting story." He let it go, but noticed the particular tone people use for things they've quietly decided are too dangerous to finish saying. Man-soo caught her once, folding his blanket in a certain way, staring a beat too long at nothing at all. The particular stillness of someone doing arithmetic they didn't want to finish. "You have that look my son used to have," he said, not unkindly. "Somewhere else." Even when he was in the room, Amara managed a small smile. "Sorry, sir. Don't apologize. I'm only asking because Zuri never talks about her father, and neither do you, and children usually talk about everything." He said it gently, no demand in it at all, just an old man who'd learned, slowly, how to ask a question without cornering someone with it. She was quiet long enough that he almost took the question back. "Then, there isn't much to tell. It was one night, a long time ago, a hotel, a party I didn't even want to go to. I never learned his name." She looked down at her hands. "He wasn't a cruel man, I remember that much, even now. He was breaking, that night, something about his family, Someone very sick, I think. He left before morning. I never saw him again." Man-soo said nothing for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes, old, private, unplaceable even to himself. A flicker of a boy who used to disappear into exactly that kind of night. Years he'd spent more energy forgetting than living. He didn't reach for it. It slid past him, the way it always did, close enough to touch, gone before he could close his hand around it. 6 years, Amara said quietly, mostly to herself. It feels longer, some days. It usually does, Man-soo said, and let the subject rest there, though something about the number sat with him strangely for the rest of the afternoon, and he couldn't have said why. 2 junior maids who'd grown too friendly with Amara were reassigned to the West Wing that same week, replaced by faces that reported straight back to Mira. Nothing Jun-ho could point to and call cruelty. Just a house, quietly rearranging itself around her, one careful piece at a time. A sudden power outage caught Amara and Jun-ho together outside Man-soo's door one evening, the whole East Wing dark, until the generator groaned to life. They waited in the dim hallway, his father already asleep inside. "Why Korea?" he asked, into the near blackness. "It's a long story." "I've got time," he said, something almost teasing in it. She smiled. He could hear it even without fully seeing her, but didn't tell him, and, to his own quiet surprise, he found he didn't mind waiting. The medication cabinet was relocated behind a locked drawer that week, keys held only by the head nurse and Mira herself. One more door quietly closing, one more careful piece moving into place. He noticed Zuri's shoes one afternoon, soles peeling, a size too small for how fast she'd grown, and said nothing about it out loud. A week later, a new pair appeared outside the staff quarters door, no note attached. Amara never learned where they'd come from. Zuri wore them proudly for a month, before it occurred to either of them to wonder. One afternoon, sprawled belly down on the carpet with a fresh sheet of paper, Zuri was coloring with the total, furrowed brow concentration of an artist under deadline, when Jun-ho, now a regular fixture in the East Wing, paused in the doorway on his way past. "What are you drawing?" "Our family." Curious despite himself, he crouched to see. Amara, a sun-yellow crayon still clutched in one fist. Man-soo in his wheelchair, wearing what was unmistakably meant to be a crown. Pepper, enormous and orange, taking up nearly a third of the page. Zuri herself, front and center, arms flung wide. He wasn't in it. He straightened slowly, an odd, hollow feeling landing somewhere in his chest he couldn't immediately name. "I'm not there," he said, and even he heard how strange it sounded out loud. Zuri glanced up, entirely without malice, the way only a 5-year-old delivers something devastating and means absolutely nothing cruel by it. "You're not always here." She went straight back to coloring Pepper's tail. Jun-ho stood in the doorway a moment longer than the situation required, turning the sentence over, before he made himself walk on toward his father's room, the feeling trailing after him longer than he expected. "The chairman is changing," one of the older staff murmured in the kitchen one morning, not meaning for it to travel. And it traveled anyway, all the way to Mira, who felt something close to real fear for the first time since this had begun. One warm afternoon, eating ice cream together in the garden, a small victory Amara had personally negotiated out of a reluctant kitchen, Zuri turned to Man-soo with the complete seriousness only small children bring to enormous questions. "When you become old, do you get to eat ice cream every day?" Man-soo considered this. Spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "I think I should," he said finally, and meant every word of it. Pepper, curled at his feet, chose that exact moment to abandon Zuri's lap for his, and Zuri leaned toward Amara, whispering, not nearly as quietly as she believed herself to be, "I think Grandpa likes you more than Mommy," which made even Man-soo throw his head back and laugh, bright and unguarded, the kind of laugh none of them had heard from him before that afternoon. Later that same visit, Pepper took a lazy swipe at Junho's trousers on his way past, and Zuri gasped, "Don't scratch the scary uncle." Junho straightened, one eyebrow raised, his best impression of wounded dignity. Scary. Zuri considered this seriously, then delivered the kind of generous correction only a 5-year-old is capable of. "Actually, you're only a little scary." He laughed again, delighted, and reached down to scoop Pepper away before the cat could try a second time. "I'll take it." The allegation came the following Thursday. A guest's earring, gone missing after a small dinner, discovered with theatrical, perfectly timed horror tucked inside the lining of Amara's coat. "I want the police called," Mira announced, loud enough for the entire staff to hear. Given her visa status, I imagine that processing won't end kindly for her. Junho arrived in time to catch the last of it, something in his expression hardening. "No police. Not until I've looked into this myself." Junho, she was caught red-handed. An earring found in a coat pocket isn't a person caught doing anything. His voice didn't rise. "I'll conduct a private review. If she's guilty, I'll call the police myself. If she isn't, this ends here, and it doesn't happen again. You're awfully invested for a maid's coat pocket." "I'm invested in this house, not destroying someone over a story that doesn't hold together." He started with the guest herself, over tea the next morning, gently pressing past her rehearsed account. "Do you remember putting the earring on that evening?" She hesitated. "I assumed I had." "I always do." A pause. "Actually, no. Now that you ask, I don't remember touching it once after I arrived." Next, the coat itself, a plain staff-issue jacket, the lining stitched shut on one side, the earring found tucked into the other, the side facing out. Amara had worn it for 8 months. It had never once been altered. "Someone opened this seam," Junho said quietly, turning it over in his hands. "This wasn't dropped in, it was placed." Finally, the junior maid who'd tidied the staff room that same afternoon, the one Mrs. Song had mentioned once, in passing, months ago. He asked her only one question, plainly, without accusation in his voice. "Who asked you to tidy that room, and what were you told to put where?" She lasted 4 seconds before she broke, words tumbling out faster than she could take them back. Madame Yoon's instructions, the small velvet box, the coat, pointed out by name. By the time she finished, she was crying harder than the guest whose earring had started the entire thing. Junho closed the file himself that evening, in front of his father, in front of Amara, in front of the entire senior staff. "The claim is false. It ends here." He looked once at Mira, standing very still in the doorway, her composure a half-second slower to arrive than usual. "It does not happen again." Mira said nothing. She didn't need to. Everyone in the room understood the sentence had been aimed directly at her, and that for the first time, she had lost in front of people who mattered. Later that night, long past when either of them should have been awake, Junho found Amara in the corridor, still shaken, refilling water glasses no one had asked her to refill. "When do you rest?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "I don't. Usually. Not tonight, especially." "Neither do I." He was quiet a moment. "For what it's worth, I believed you before I finished asking a single question. Why?" "Because my father's laughed more in the last few months than he had in the 4 years before them. People who do that to a house don't plant earrings in coats." He studied her, something unreadable behind it. "Thank you for whatever it is you're doing to him. He's easy to love," she said quietly, before she could stop herself, and then looked faintly startled that she'd said it out loud at all. Something in his chest did something he chose, carefully, not to examine that night. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, which was somehow the cruelest part. Amara was carrying fresh linens down the east corridor when Mira stepped directly into her path, arms crossed, something in her eyes that had clearly been building for weeks. "You think you're clever, getting my husband's son to fight your battles for you. Madam, I don't want any trouble. You are the trouble." Her hand moved before Amara had time to brace for it. The slap landed hard enough that the linens spilled between them. For one full second, Amara stood frozen, cheek burning. Then something in her, months of near catches, docked pay, a fake earring, a threatened deportation, simply snapped. Her hand moved before her mind caught up. The sound of the return slap was louder than the first. Mira staggered back, hand flying to her own cheek. Genuine shock for exactly 1 instant before something colder replaced it. Footsteps. Fast. Familiar. Jun-ho arrived exactly 1/2 second too late to see the first slap, exactly in time to see the second. "She hit me," Mira said, tears arriving with theatrical, devastating precision. "I said one thing to her, one thing." "That's not," Amara started. "I'm his wife. I live in fear in my own home." Jun-ho looked at Amara, looked at his stepmother, crying now in earnest, a fresh mark undeniably real on her cheek. Looked back at Amara. "She hit me first," Amara said quietly. "I shouldn't have hit her back, but she hit me first. I don't know what to believe right now." "Believe what you saw," Mira whispered. Jun-ho closed his eyes. When he opened them, something in his face had shut, quiet and final. "Pack your things. I'll have your final pay ready within the hour." "Jun-ho, please, just go." She packed in silence, Zuri watching her mother fold what little they owned into a single bag, Pepper pacing the room restlessly, tail low, as if he understood something was ending. There was no goodbye, no last visit to the East Wing. Amara had learned, over these months, exactly how quickly kindness in this house could be revoked, and she didn't trust herself to survive a proper farewell without shattering in front of her daughter. She collected her final pay from the chief of staff, envelope thin in her hand, Zuri's fingers wrapped tight around her other one, Pepper's carrier bumping her leg with every step toward the front door. She didn't see Jun-ho standing at the top of the staircase until she was almost at the door. She didn't stop. It was Zuri who paused, scratching an itch at her own shoulder, sleeve slipping down for just a moment, revealing the small, star-shaped birthmark she'd had since birth, the one Amara reminded her almost daily not to pick at. Jun-ho's whole body went still. He knew that mark. He had one exactly like it, in the exact same place, high on his own left shoulder. A small family joke once, his mother tracing it with one finger when he was small, telling him it meant he was marked for something important. He hadn't thought about it in years. He was thinking about it now, with a force that nearly buckled his knees. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He watched Amara pull the front door open and walk out into the evening with her daughter's hand in hers and a cat carrier swinging at her side, disappearing down the long drive without once looking back. Somewhere behind him, in the sitting room, Mira allowed herself a small, private exhale of relief and murmured a quiet word of thanks to Susie, who accepted it with a satisfied nod, a debt paid in a currency no one else in the house would ever fully understand. He stood at the top of that staircase long after the front door closed, none of the household noticing that the young master of Baek Group hadn't taken a single full breath in almost a minute. He didn't sleep that night. He lay in the dark, running the same 6 seconds over and over, the sleeve slipping, the mark, the impossible, exact shape of it, and told himself it meant nothing, a coincidence, a birthmark shared by strangers, the way birthmarks sometimes are. He didn't believe himself even once. Somewhere beneath the disbelief, quieter, harder to look at directly, sat something else. A night he rarely let himself remember. A party he'd walked into as an almost unrecognizable version of himself. A stranger whose name he'd never learned and whose face had blurred, over 6 years, into something he could no longer quite bring into focus. He told himself that had nothing to do with any of this either. He didn't believe that one either. No cat sat by the servant's door the following afternoon. No one had to shoo him away from the kitchen or find him underfoot in the corridor, waiting for 4 o'clock the way he always did. It took the household most of the day to notice that the silence itself was the first sign anything had changed, that the little rituals holding this wing together for months had simply stopped happening all at once, and no one had thought to say so out loud until it was already unbearable not to. Man-soo noticed before anyone told him. He sat by the window from noon onward, watching the long drive with the particular, terrible stillness of a man who already suspects the answer to a question he hasn't found the courage to ask yet. "Where are they?" he finally said, to no one, to everyone. The nurse hesitated a beat too long, and that hesitation told him everything before a single word of it did. "They're gone, Chairman, since yesterday evening." Something in Man-soo's face didn't crumble so much as simply stop, all at once, the way a house goes dark, the instant the last working line finally gives out. He didn't cry. He didn't speak again for a long while. He only turned back to the window, to the empty drive below, and kept watching it anyway, the way people watch long after watching has stopped making any sense, because stopping felt like the one thing he couldn't survive doing. Jun-ho found him like that an hour later, and understood, standing frozen in the doorway, that his father might not survive losing them a second time. 2 things settled into him at once, equal in weight, impossible to pull apart from each other. His father needed them back, urgently, before whatever fragile progress these past months had built came undone completely. And somewhere out there, walking away from this house, with a bag over her shoulder and a cat carrier at her side, was a woman he needed to find, not only for his father's sake anymore, but because of a small, star-shaped mark he couldn't stop seeing every time he closed his eyes. He picked up his phone and began making calls before he'd fully decided what he was even going to say when he found her. "Do you think Jun-ho will find Amara?" And between Man-soo watching an empty driveway and Jun-ho staring at a birthmark that just rewrote his whole life, who do you think is more broken tonight? If this story already has you holding your breath, like this video, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter.